You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 149. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We're so excited to have you here with us today. So, are you feeling overworked, stressed, or like you just never have time to complete your to-do list? If you're a teacher, you've probably absolutely said yes to this. And really, anyone in society right now is kind of feeling this way. We've got a lot on our plates. So in this episode of the Balanced Educator Podcast, we've invited Dan Jackson, an educator and author of the book Work Less, Teach More, to share concrete strategies from his book to help you better manage your time so you can be an effective teacher and live a life you love. Before we get into this episode, we're excited to share this week's sponsor, EduCalm Classroom. EduCalm Classroom is our online social emotional learning and mindfulness program made by teachers for a real-life classroom. If you want to give your students strategies for managing their emotions and behaviors, for improving mental health, and if you want to have a daily routine that helps to create a calm and focused classroom, the EduCalm Classroom program will make it easy for you to reach these goals. All you have to do is log into our website, choose a theme you'd like to focus on for the month, like mindfulness or growth mindset or emotions or mindful movement. There's many different options. And then use the ready-to-use resources in either French or English because the program is bilingual. It's really as simple as pressing play on the audios and enjoying a 2 or 5 minute guided mindfulness practice with your students. So you don't have to be an expert in mindfulness or social emotional learning to use this program. You get to learn and participate with your students. So you can use the first unit of EduCalm Classroom for free indefinitely. There's no expiry when you sign up for the free trial at educalm.com. And that free trial will also give you a training video that you can use to learn how to kind of navigate the website and use the program. If you're enjoying the resources from the free trial, you feel like it fits your teaching style and it fits your goals, then you can get over a year worth of no prep mindfulness audios, videos, printables, and more by signing up for a yearly membership. So this program really removes all the hurdles you might be having in terms of trying to find good resources and trying to find, things that follow one another and actually make sense throughout the year. This program is ready to go. You don't have to do any prep. It really removes that barrier and that hurdle for you. So to learn more or sign up, go to educalm.com. That's EduCalme. All right. I hope you enjoy this excellent interview with Dan Jackson. Hello, Dan. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
No, thank you so much, Kaylee, for having me on.
I just read your book and I think it is awesome and that all teachers should read it, even though those that, our listeners probably have learned a lot about self-care and managing their time through our podcast. But even for myself, that I live this message, there was things that stood out in your book that I was like, oh yeah, that's such a good point. So I'm so excited to share about your book today with our listeners. Work Less, Teach More, How to Be an Effective Teacher. The title says it all. That's what we all want.
Oh, and live the life you love.
And live the life you love. Right. Sorry. I missed that
It's not just about teaching.
Yeah. So good. So let's start off. Can you introduce yourself and tell us kind of how life led you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I am Dan. I teach in Sydney. I currently do a lot of education consulting. I run teacherspd.net. I'm the host of the Effective Teaching Podcast. But I got here basically, I, like most people, started teaching quite young, and it didn't take too long for me to work out that I was really getting into too much work. I went to a new school and I thought that I had this great role that I really wanted. It was a dual role teaching two subjects that I loved. And I just found myself throughout that process saying yes to lots of stuff. And I felt too that I was getting given roles I didn't even ask for, that I didn't say that I would accept, but suddenly they were announced to everyone that I was doing it. I was like, I did not remember saying that I was going to be doing that. And so halfway through one of my years, my wife was given a role that meant that I didn't have to work. In fact, it was better for me not to work because I needed to go and look after our 2-year-old. And so I felt very excited to go in and tell my principal that I was only going to be there for 2 more weeks. And even one of those weeks, I was going to be down in Canberra and not there. So just like, thanks, I'm looking forward to going. He was a bit shocked by it all, but I left, and my headspace at that time, definitely wasn't where teachers' headspaces should be, and that wasn't necessarily the best response to everything. At least not to be happy about it, and to all the things that went with that. But when I left, I actually then began starting up my own business. I started creating a website. I started reading business books. And as you know, as you get into business, there is so many business books out there. Like, I think they're probably a dime a dozen. There's literally millions of them. And you go and you get the business books and you start reading through them. And it doesn't matter which one you start with, right? I started with a fairly small one, and I read it, and it had this message of being effective in your business and doing the right things, not the wrong things, doing more of those right things, outsourcing stuff, to really basically make it so that you, as the person in charge of your business, is doing as little as possible, but you're really doing the most effective things that are most important for your business. And as I was reading all these books, there's thousands of strategies that they teach you about. And then when I went back to teaching, and I went back to helping start up a brand new school, and my principal was very clear when she hired me that I'm relying a lot on you for doing heaps of stuff, right? For all the programming, the curriculum, helping train the other teachers in a few things. And I loved going into that, particularly with all the business stuff, because I suddenly just was like applying all this stuff. And I found that I reduced my workload at school massively and was able to not just teach really well, and I actually found myself teaching better than I ever had before. And I was enjoying my roles. I was loving my responsibilities there, but I also still had time to run my business, start up a new business, and still be with my family. And so suddenly I could put all this stuff in, not feel overburdened, not feel like I was burning out. And I could still, I was still had hobbies. I was still going to the gym. I was still, I had time for all the things. And I was amazed at how good that was. But it was only on reflection that I realized that I was doing that too. So last year, I surveyed a whole bunch of teachers to find out how I could help them best. And they all just complained about the time. They were all too busy, which I knew. I was like, oh, I shouldn't have even asked a survey. I knew they were all going to say this, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted them to tell me that they needed help with curriculum, they needed help with behavior management, because that's what I wanted to be working on. But when it came, I was like, oh, I can't really do much for that. But then as the year progressed and COVID kept impacting everything for us here, I reflected more on what they were asking and how I had done things. I was like, actually, if I managed to be a deputy or a vice principal, if you're somewhere other than Australia, if I managed to be a deputy or a vice principal and still also manage to run businesses and spend time with my family, I probably do have something that I can give. And so I went through and I thought through all the stuff that I'd read and all those kinds of things. I went, I'm going to write a book that's for teachers, that is just applying all of the stuff that I learned to education. And it's got examples of, how I applied it in my teaching. And that's where I got to where I am today. The book only came out, at the end of last year. So I'm pretty excited to be on here chatting to you about it.
So awesome. So that is such a huge shift that you went through. And that's a really similar experience that Josiane and I had too. Once we started learning about business, we became better teachers, and so much shifted in how we did things. Because I think as teachers, there's kind of maybe a lack in our training about how to manage our time, because so much is asked of us as teachers. And there's, a very small amount of time that you actually get to do your work where you're not in front of your students. So then the work builds up, it piles up, and when are you ever going to get it done? So what shifted for you to be able to start making this huge transformation?
I think part of the shift was that at the beginning of the book, I talk about this shift in mindset of people. When I was at my last school, just before I resigned, I was blaming my principal all the time. I was blaming my head teachers and my deputies and vice principals at the time because they were taking my time. They were constantly loading things onto me, and I had to do all this stuff. But I had a mind shift that comes with business as well, and it was just people aren't taking your time. They can't. You have to actually give it to them. And that shift then meant that as I went in, I was like, well, I have to be careful what I say yes to, what I say no to. And actually, I came up with a bit of a criteria set of what I would use to determine whether I was going to say yes to something. So if my principal came and said that she wanted me to go and be involved in creating all the booklets or something for the whole year group for a particular subject, I had to then weigh up, okay, well, that's going to take me a lot of time, a lot of effort. That's going to impact, a lot of students and all the rest of it. And so I had this system that I would use to weigh it up. And then I went, okay, well, I can do that one, but it means I actually can't do this other thing that you want me to do. And so she then would weigh that up and go, well, which one does she want me to do most? Because normally principals don't come in, or your head teacher or your deputy isn't saying you have to do this, you have to do it this way, and there's no other choices. Even when they have got particular ways they want things to do, if you push back a little bit and go, can I do it this way instead because it's more efficient for me at least, then they often will go, well, yeah, okay, that should be fine, particularly if you have a reason for it or anything like that. But showing that you've thought through it was great. So having that mind shift for me was great going in, and then setting up those systems of how to say yes and say no. Because at the last school, I'd said yes to a lot, and I'd been warned not to say yes to everything, and I felt like I hadn't said yes to everything, to be honest. But at the end, I was just like, I've said yes to too much.
Well, I've definitely noticed, throughout the years that the teachers that, when someone is looking for a teacher to fill some sort of role, to do some sort of work, they are just like in need of someone right away. So they're going to go to the person that always says yes first to try to reduce their workload, right? They're not going to go to the person that often says no. They're going to go to the person. So if you become that person that's always saying yes, then everyone's going to keep coming to you. So saying no can feel so scary. And I think a lot of us feel a variety of emotions when we say no, especially when we're not used to saying no. Those first few times that we say no, we feel guilty. We feel like we're going to be judged. So I like this idea of having a yes-no criteria. Can you explain that more?
Yeah. So basically all I do with my criteria is I would go through and count up, how much time is this going to cost me? Because anything you say yes to requires time. What's it pulling me away from? Is that what I'm doing? Is it something that I want to be involved in? Because there's a level of that too. There is a level within schools of, that might be extracurricular stuff that I actually enjoy being part of. And if it's something you enjoy being part of, and it also is helping you move towards your goals, I think that then it's more something that's more likely to get a yes, partly because it's good for your well-being to be doing things you enjoy.
Exactly.
But also, if it's moving you towards your goal particularly, and I think that's something that teachers struggle with a lot, is that at the beginning of years, at least in Australia, we always, as you go into your school year, teachers will set up, you have to put up your professional development goals or anything like that. But then they're just goals to tick a box rather than goals we're actually working towards. And so by having criteria around how I say yes and no that relates to my goals, that actually makes sure that I'm moving towards my goals and constantly improving and all that kind of stuff. So I weigh up those kinds of things. I weigh up, is this something that I think is going to be best for me and for the students? And, if the cost in terms of my time, in terms of money, because it might cost me money as well, and all that kind of stuff, if that looks to me to be worth the outcomes and it's helping me to move towards my goals, if it's helping my students particularly, and I think it's going to be fantastic, then I might say yes. But if I look at it and say, well, I don't really see this as something that's fantastic for my goals. It might still be great for the students, but it's not actually helping me to move towards my professional development goals, and it's going to cost me a lot. I might say, well, no, I'd rather not do that. It is hard sometimes to find that balance between, it helps the kids, but it doesn't help me, or it helps me. But you got to remember that the kids have the whole school. You're not their only teacher generally, particularly in high school for sure. You're definitely not their only teacher.
Yeah.
But as kids go through school, they're there for 13 years. You're not the only person that's going to impact their life. And generally speaking, most kids are going to forget most of their teachers. I mean, if you go through your school life, you might be able to remember some of your primary school teachers and some of your high school teachers, but generally you don't remember all of them. And that is just about your connection. It's sometimes about being interested in the same stuff, etc. So remembering that you're not the be all and end all for the students. I know that the school actually create a culture that kind of says that to you, but you've got to do anything for your kids. You've got to actually be willing to give up, time with your own kids for the students at your school. And you're like, well, no, I want to see my kids when I get home. I don't want to get home and then have to write reports and go through and cut out dioramas, or, I want to go home and play with my kids and chat with them and find out how their day was. And I think that's, by having that criteria set up, really enables you to say yes and no in a way that's actually more beneficial to everyone. And when you're more purposeful with what you're doing, you actually find that you achieve things faster and that you have a greater impact because you're choosing the right things.
Yeah. And in the end, that's going to make you a better teacher, right? And as a teacher, I think sometimes we forget that our job first and foremost is to be a great teacher in the classrooms that we've been assigned to teach. There's so many extracurriculars, and those are important to the school and to the students' growth as well. But if all of the extracurriculars are taking away from our ability to be a present and effective teacher in our role number one, then that's a problem. So talking about your these criteria, to me, I'm thinking, okay, that takes some time. That might take some time to actually consider these things. So how do you get out of the reflex of being like, oh yeah, okay, I think I can make that work? How do you kind of give yourself the space to have that questioning period with yourself?
Yeah, I generally will ask for a day to think about things. I think that's, unless it's something that has, if they're asking me to do something that day, in which case I might just say, just give me 10 minutes and I'll get back to you. And then I'll just sit down for 10 minutes and go, what is he actually asking? What are the details? I might need to ask them a whole bunch of questions as well, because they might give me, can you go and do this? And I might have no idea what that actually involves. And so I might need to go to them and discuss, can you just tell me, how long is it going to take, and this, and sometimes the person who's asking can be helpful as well. I've done it before where, if it's my vice principal, or if it's my principal or something, I'll actually ask them a whole bunch of questions and go, I'm currently trying to get this and this and this done. How much time does that take? And they will know quite quickly and go, do you know what? Get the other stuff done, because they know that that's more important. And then I'll go and ask this person. And if I can't find someone, I might come back to you. And then you go, okay, that's great. That sounds wonderful. And so actually being upfront and honest with people about what you're trying to work out is really good, because they just go, oh, you know what? I can see that you're already doing stuff that's important. You're already quite busy with something. I can then go and ask, because as a principal or as a vice principal, and I was a deputy, which is the same as a vice principal. You would ask someone, and if they said yes, that's great. But if they said no, I wasn't sitting there going, no, you have to do as I say. I'm sitting there going, okay, I'll go and find someone else. It's not something where I'd feel like, you're disrespecting me, or you're not fulfilling your role, or I'm going to judge you. We've all been teachers. We all know that teaching is very busy, that it's got a lot behind it. And if you don't have the time right now to do this thing that I've asked you to do, which is going to take the next 45 minutes, for example, of your one period off that you've got for the day, you're like, well, no, I can't do that. This is my only period off. I have to prep my lessons. I have to finish writing my reports. And you also want me to do this. And they're like, yeah, okay, no, don't worry. I'll go find someone who's done their reports, who's got 3 periods off today, who's, those other people exist.
Yeah. And I'm sure, principals would prefer that you say no than you say yes and burn yourself out, because no one knows what your workload is except for you, especially in a school, because there's so many moving parts, so many different, and we're quite independent in our classrooms. We're very independent in kind of how we run things. So most people don't really get much of a glimpse into what our life looks like inside and outside of our classroom. So yeah, we need to advocate for ourselves. And I think that the way that the kind of strategy that you use is super helpful. And teachers should really think about that. What is my criteria for saying yes and no, and not feel that pressure to give an answer right away? Take a couple minutes to think about it. Yeah. So there's something in your book that you mentioned that I hadn't heard of before and I really loved. So as teachers, we have so many tasks, so many things that we feel that we need to complete. And you mentioned Eisenhower's urgent/important matrix, because we can't fit everything into one day, but it can be so hard to distinguish like what really needs to get done, what doesn't really need to get done. Sometimes we just keep adding to that to-do list, and then eventually our to-do list is pages long and we feel this crushing guilt that we're not getting it all done. So can you talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So part of it comes out of that to-do list. Yeah, you sit there with your to-do list and you just keep adding to it and adding to it. And even if you're good with your to-do list, like you might at least move things around as to, I need to get this done. I need to get that done next. You're not necessarily just going, well, I'll just add this to the bottom of my list, and when I get to it, I'll get to it. Because the nature of teaching and the nature of life really is that there's always new things to do. Yeah, whether you've gotten the old ones done or not, there's always more to get done. And so Eisenhower's matrix is all about how to work out what you should be doing, which ones you need to prioritize and do first, which ones you need to prioritize and book into your schedule to do later, and the ones that you really shouldn't do, that you can just chuck out and never do. And then there's also other ones that kind of you look at and go, well, maybe I need to get those done, but maybe I don't. And to really question things. So by splitting things, I think the most important aspects really are whether it's important or not important. And so the matrix itself, so it's just 4 squares. So one that has important and urgent on it. The other one has important and not urgent. And then you have not important and urgent and not important and not urgent. And of course, anything that's not important and not urgent, you should never do. That should just get chucked out. You should never do those things unless it happens to be something that you legally as a teacher have to do. And so there are some things that legally you are required to do, which actually are not important and are not urgent, but you've got to get them done because some person above you said you have to get them done. Otherwise, basically, you're not fulfilling your role. You can get sued. All those kinds of things. So you do still have to do anything that's legal. So anything that's legal or that's explicitly written in your contract, you just have to do. But anything else, chuck it out. The other one that you want to go through with a fine-tooth comb is the not important and urgent. And that's probably the column where you're going to get rid of the most, to be honest, because as teachers, what we tend to do is we do the urgent. We always are doing the thing that's urgent. I have to get this done today. I have to get this one done within the next 10 minutes. This one's due tomorrow. Yeah, and we see our kids work the same way. The assignment's due tomorrow, so I'll do that. But the assignment actually, I would put the assignment in the urgent, not important bracket, unless your assignments are really well done, because I don't see the assignment is meant to be evidence of their learning, not their learning, right? And so I actually see, their learning is the bit that's important. And that's the bit that should be the thing that we really focus on a lot more. And then the assessment, it could be a pop quiz that you use as an assessment. And then that's really not a big thing, but that's what the kids are going to stress about. That's what they're going to focus on because it's urgent. Whether it's important or not, that's aside the point. It's important to them because they need to make sure that number that goes on their report back to their parents is a nice number. But so by doing this as a teacher, we can get rid of those things that aren't important, and it helps us to start questioning whether or not something we're doing is important. And whether something is important really depends on a few things. It depends on its impact on your students. It depends on its impact on you. It depends on where it's taking you. And I particularly like to, the book has this whole chapter that's devoted to working out, where you're going as a teacher, and also not just as a teacher, but in your life outside of school, what's life ideally going to look like for you type stuff. And then your important things match up with that, because that's the thing that is most important. You're identifying the things that are most important to you. And so as you then use the matrix, you can go, well, does it actually align with the goals that I have as a teacher, or the things and the people that I want to impact as a teacher? Is it meeting those things, or is it pulling me away from other things in this important, goals and stuff for me that I've already said that's super important, but now I'm going to do something that's urgent, not important, that pulls me away from the things that are important. And I think we do that all the time as teachers. Our reports are one of those things. There's something that doesn't get done till it's urgent, and they're legal. So yes, you do have to do them, right? But if we had have planned out our time better, we actually could have gone, well, this is something we have to get done. I can schedule that into my calendar. I can set up systems and processes to actually basically have my reports done way before they're due. And the only thing you then need to do is add in that final grade, because you can write all your comments about your students all through the year. You can write those comments and you can come up with all your stuff that you need. And then it's just about, okay, we're just ticking boxes and putting in numbers. And that suddenly reduces your stress, because you're not doing it all at once. You're not writing 140 reports in the next 2 days, filling in every minute of your time, staying up late. You can actually manage to get your sleep in and all that kind of stuff. So that's the unimportant aspect down the bottom. You want to get rid of as much of that as you can, unless you legally have to do it. The top, well, it depends on how you do it, but at the moment I've got it at the top. So if it's urgent, it's at the top. So urgent and important, that quadrant are the things you have to do today, because they are important. Right? You've decided these things are important. That means they're going to have an impact on my students. They're going to take me towards the things that I've already identified are important, and they're urgent, which means they have to get done really soon. They might have a deadline. The quadrant that gets neglected the most is the important but not urgent, because it's not important, because it's not urgent. We tend to just constantly move it down our priority list. Our to-do list, we're ticking it off, and then we're like, well, that's not urgent. I can do that tomorrow. And therefore, I'll move this other thing that's actually not important, but it is urgent. I'll move it up and I'll get that done today. And that's a problem, because those things that are important but not urgent eventually can become urgent. And when they do, they tend to be really messy. So when you think of the things that are important but not urgent, these are things like looking after your health. Until you actually break down and get sick, it's not important. It's not urgent for you. But once you're sick, it's urgent. But then it could be, that could be surgery. That could be weeks in the hospital. That could be, a long-term sickness that you're just at home with this crazy flu, but it's actually this long-term flu because it's been building up. You've been stressed. You've been this. You haven't taken the time out to look after yourself. It can be things like doing research around how you want to do your teaching. So if you've set up a professional development goal and you want to actually learn something new or improve in a particular area, that often is not urgent. You don't need to tick that off necessarily, but it is something that you'd like to do. And so you tend not to do it. But if you did it, it would actually improve a lot of your other stuff. It's going to improve your teaching. It's going to improve your behavior management. It's going to improve whatever aspect of your teaching that you're really focusing on improving. And so it's super important for us to take those things that are important but not urgent and schedule them into your calendar, into your diary, and really block out that time and protect it. If we identify how important it is, then I think it becomes easier to prioritize and to make sure we get it done. And so what I do is I put it into my schedule. Okay, here is the time I'm doing this. I block that time out. And then if anyone asks me to do anything else in that time, my response is always, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'm not available at that time. They don't need to know what I'm doing. That means I'm not available. I could be having a bath at that time to look after myself. I could be doing yoga. I could be, sitting down and marking. I could be sitting down and coming up with great ideas for next term's programs that I have to create and the work for my students. Maybe I'm doing project-based learning, which requires a really long, thoughtful process. And that could be what I've scheduled that time out for. But they don't need to, I just need to say, well, I'm sorry, I actually have something booked in at that time that I can't move. And that's all you need to
Love
say.
that, because normally we feel like we need to explain, like, I'm so sorry, I can't because I have, and you feel like you need to tell them you have something urgent going on, but you don't have to explain. Right. You can just say, no, I'm not available. I love that.
Right. And you think it has to be this massive thing. Like, if I'm saying no to my principal, it has to be like for a doctor's appointment, right? But no, you just need to be able to say, there's something that I'm doing that I can't reschedule, or and you can't just keep rescheduling things that are important. It may not be important to your principal, but if it's important to you, then you need to make sure you don't reschedule those things, because otherwise you'll go through life and you'll never get to those important things. You'll get to them so rarely that you're impacting that area that you want to have an impact. Like if I think of my children, if I don't prioritize that, if I constantly just go through life going with the flow, then I'm going to allow everyone to fill up my time, pulling me away until my wife really pulls me back.
Yeah.
And just goes, oh no, and it might become too late. My wife might go, you know what, we're gone because you're at work all the time. You're constantly doing this. Everyone else gets your time, but we don't. You don't prioritize us, and that's what comes at the end if you don't prioritize things that are important. And that can happen with your health. It can happen with your reports. If you want to get your reports done, if you actually schedule time in and go, you know what, every week I'm going to spend 10 minutes writing a comment for one of my kids in the 5 weeks leading up to reports. You can just suddenly really knock off a lot of work beforehand, and it doesn't take massive loads. Reports one of those things where you can actually, because they're in small chunks, they're easy to break down into smaller time periods and go, you know what, I'm going to spend 10 minutes to half an hour just writing out a few reports, and you might get 5 done, and you're like, sweet, I've got done 5, and I can come back and do another 5 another time. Or there's so that chunking aspect just enables them to be really flexible to fill in those small spaces where you're like, I find myself with an extra 15 minutes right now. All right, I'm going to do this.
You mentioned something in your book, so that you have a section where you talk about outsourcing. So what are tasks that you really don't need to be the one doing it, that you can get other people to do it? And one of the things you mentioned was having your students write their own report card comments. Can you talk about that? Because I was like, this is genius.
Yeah, so students, they know that their comment necessarily isn't going to go in there, right? If they sit there and say, oh, I'm a perfect student and all those kinds of things, I'm going to get that and go, oh, that's rubbish, chuck that out, and I'm going to write a whole different one. And so they know that, I think. And so if you talk to students about what normally goes into a report and how it's written and the kinds of things, you want to mention the things they've been involved in at school that are positive, what things can they improve on, and allow them to go through and kind of write it up, right? And then when it comes to you then doing it, you look at their comment, and depending on who the student is, right, you can copy and paste and do minor edits. You can completely rewrite it as it goes in, but they've given you all the things that you want to mention because they know what their weaknesses are. They can tell you, I really suck at algebra, so I need to improve that. Or I was involved in the school football team, I was involved in cheerleading, I was involved in 600, I was in the band, I was this. They can tell you all the different things that they actually, whereas it's hard for us as a teacher to know this student was involved in 10 different things, this other student was involved in 5. I don't really remember that student at the back's name because she hasn't spoken most of the year. And you're struggling to work out, whereas if they give it to you, you know that you can check things, right? And you tell students, I'm going to check everything that you write. This isn't necessarily going in, but if you do it really well, I might just, it'll probably make up most of your comment. They will love that. They might go home and tell their parents, and then the parent might come in and go, why is my kid writing? So I'm just helping them to do self-reflection for the year, to think about what they've learned, what they're struggling with, etc. I'm helping them to develop those skills. That's an easy answer. You can tell them I'm not, that they're my comments that go in the reports, because they will be.
Yeah.
But it saves you so much time and so much thinking process to go, okay, this is what I'm going to say. And then you can still add your, and they talk too much, or not that's necessarily something you're going to say, but you can still add those extra things that you want to add, but it just shrinks down that time so much I remember once having to write reports and I had to look up, we had an online system and you had to look up the kid and look up all the things they were involved in and then mention half those things because it related to what you have to talk about in their comments. And then you had to also go through all their past assignments. You're like, well, what comments do I give this kid on their assignments? Do I save those somewhere? And if you don't have a system set up, that becomes really hard. Whereas if you have a system where you get something from the kids, or there's another system I mentioned where as you mark assessment tasks, you actually keep a copy of your comments and stuff that you're making to them, so that you're not just commenting on their marks, you're actually commenting on the quality of their work and what was in their work. And you can say, Julianne did a fantastic report on rockets and going to the moon, or whatever your assignment is, right? And it was beautiful, and it had this, and it had that, because you've got your comment there, and you can actually pull stuff out of that comment and collate it eventually into your comment. And if most schools, you've got multiple assessment tasks, you then have multiple comments that you can then tie together and go, that's half to 3/4 of my comment done. Now I'm just going to take stuff that they've told me, add that in around the sides, send it in. And it just, systems like that, and it doesn't, whatever system you want to use, but having a system for anything saves you a lot of time as you're doing it. So that's definitely a system I like to use that takes time off. And getting students to write stuff, I think, is very beneficial for them and saves us time.
Yes. And it's so much more meaningful to them, because one thing that's always disheartening for me with writing report card comments is we have a very kind of specific format that we have to use when we're writing comments that I find can feel quite impersonal, and that when the students read the comment, it doesn't actually mean much to them. So I would love the idea of teaching them what is the system, kind of this is the way that the comment gets written. And then now you generate your own comment. This is how I would write the comment for you. You do your own so that you really understand what it means. And then we'll talk about it together and review it together and talk about if we're on the same page of, is this really what demonstrates your learning the best? And that just already, I'm like, that would be great. They would be so much more meaningful for the students and feel so much more meaningful to me, because I wouldn't feel like I'm just doing all this work for nothing. It's actually something that's going to mean something to them, and then that they can explain to their parents too.
Yeah. Report comments these days, they're just so, like, you read them, like you write them, and then you read them, you're like, if I wasn't the person writing that, I wouldn't have a clue what I've said. Like, and I think they're designed to be that way. And then you send it home to a parent who English is their second or third language, and you're like, yeah, that's what your students like. And they don't look at the comment, they just look at the grades, and that's not the system you want to set up, I don't think.
Yeah, I really hope that's something that starts to change in the education world soon, because I don't think that it is effective as a tool of communication. So hopefully that it can improve. Hopefully someone higher up in the system is doing some studies on this and recognizing that it might not be the best way to go. So one more thing, as you're talking about systems, in your book, you also talked about templates. So, I'm seeing this kind of recurrence of how do we kind of reduce our workload by doing things in a way that are more efficient, taking out the things that we don't need to be doing every time. So what is a way to start using templates in our work as teachers?
Yeah, look, I think anything that a teacher that you actually need to do and that is impactful, those types of things, if it's something you're doing regularly, like over and over again, year to year, term to term, or sometimes week to week, if you have a template that is half filled in already, that you keep, it can be a Word document if you're using Google or something, and you can, in those, most software these days, you can actually save things as a template as well. So it actually sits there in your templates. And so anytime you need to use it, you just click on it and it will create a new one, so you're not always having to make a copy of your Word document or something that you've got. But having, like, I do it for my programs and stuff, I'll have, all my name will fill in, the date will automatically fill itself in, and it's all laid out the same for every program I do. And I just go through and change a couple of things. I'll enter the year here, I'll enter whatever the unit's called there, and then it's laid out with where the stuff from the syllabus goes, where my actual teaching and learning aspects go. And sometimes I'll even have a structure to how I like to teach. So I'll have a template for my project-based learning units, and so it'll start by that big launch day and the driving inquiry questions, and then the kids in their groups getting to know each other. Like, it'll have that already in it because I know I'm going to use that a couple of times a year, or maybe every term, depending on what age they are and what topics we're looking at. But having those in there, it just saves you time. And it can be 5 minutes here, it can be 10 minutes, but across the space of the year, it's saving me 20 hours. It's saving me almost a whole week's work because those templates are already filled in. And I'll have my year 12 templates that have the syllabus in them already, and you go, I just pull that out, the syllabus is already laid out there, and I'm just adjusting things. And you can, that's if you're creating a new program. If I'm not, I'll just pull up last year's one, adjust it, and go from there, right? And there's just having those templates saves you a lot. And even with my emails, I have templates. If I constantly am sending the same email or similar emails, I'll create a template and just go, right, every time I get this email, this is the email that goes back, and it's copy, paste, put the name at the top, see you later, it's gone. And so it can really save time as you go. And it's just about systematizing things, because having a system can really impact the amount of time that you spend on things. And then, the things that you then focus on, in the book, I talk about the 80-20 rule as well. And the 80-20 rule basically is that 20% of what anyone does in any particular area, whatever, creates 80% of the impact. So 20% of what a student does generates 80% of their learning. 20% of what a teacher does generates 80% of their impact on students, or 20% of what you do in your business generates 80% of your income. So and you apply that to anything and everything. It's a general principle. It's not meant to be exact or specific. It's just this thing that was observed across a lot of areas. And so if I take my systems and I take that rule and I say, well, if I can reduce anything from that extra 80% that I'm doing and really get it down until I have more time to focus on the 20%, that is super important for us to do as teachers, because the 20% stuff is the stuff that normally requires you it's the stuff that you have to do as a teacher. It's the stuff you're trained in, the stuff that you're qualified for. And anything that's outside of that, if you can find someone else to do it, whether it be a student or a child at home or an administrative assistant, if you happen to be privileged enough to be in a position that has one of those, take all that 80% and you want to give that to someone else, because that's not the stuff that's having the great impact. The stuff that's having the impact is that 20%. And so that's your developing your relationship with your students. It's your time actually in your classroom, and the time in your classroom where you're doing stuff with your students in a way that's actually impactful, not the stuff in your classroom where you're marking the roll and when you're having them stand behind their chairs to say good morning to you before they sit down, or you're making them line up in two straight lines. It's how you greet them. It's how you actually then sit down next to them and help them to understand a particular process or a struggle, or help them refine their creative process that they're using. Or those are the things that actually create an impact, and that's where you want to spend your time. And that's also going to be your creating of programs and units of work. It's going to be how you create your assessments. Even if you create quick, easy quizzes all the time, that's not actually great assessing, because you want to actually assess whether or not students have learned stuff, and that requires you to think through how you design things. Even if you do use a quiz, you want to make sure that you, at least if the kid gets it wrong, you want that wrong answer to tell you their thinking process. It's much more important to ask student, why is -1 a negative, and then actually have to explain why, than it is to say, well, give me a negative number, because they might get up to a negative number using the wrong process or with a bad understanding of it. And maths can be really easy to do that. If you do 2 times 2 as your question in class, that's a terrible question to use to check whether students understand multiplication, because if they do 2 plus 2, they get the same answer. And so that's the kind of stuff you're trying to avoid. And so just being able to focus on the things that matter most that matrix helps us to identify those important things. Those important things are normally your 20% things. And then you've got this 80% of fluff that you're also doing. And some of that legally you've got to do. Some of that is priorities, processes of your school. And you can't necessarily avoid all of it, but you want to try and avoid as much of it as you can. And you can do that explicitly. You can do that under the radar for some of that, and just you want to be, and we all feel it. I think this is what causes the burnout. It's not even necessarily that we have such a huge workload, because when you talk to teachers and you do surveys and stuff, teachers are working around 55 hours a week, and there are more than double that in terms of work, like daytime hours in a week, where you could basically be having another whole job on top of that to fill in your time. But I feel like it's part of the reason why we feel so burnt out is because the stuff we want to do, the stuff we're trained to do, is not what we spend most of our time doing. We spend a lot of our time doing, we have to do workplace health and safety inspections and risk assessments, and we have to fill in, all these extra documents. It was like, what's the point of this document that I'm filling in? Who's benefiting from this? You've got to sit through meeting after meeting after meeting. And I've talked to teachers who have sat in 2-hour meetings that the content of the meeting had been finished in 15 minutes, and the person running the meeting made them stay there for the full 2 hours and was trying to generate conversation and get questions from the floor during that time. I just think this is such a waste of time for these teachers. That's a massive 80% task. Most meetings that teachers are in are an 80% task. Most of them could be an email. Most of them could be anything other than a meeting, right? Meetings are for when everyone needs to come together and everyone needs to talk. And that doesn't really happen in whole staff meetings. Whole staff meetings are for when people are giving announcements. And announcements, as far as I'm concerned, they can go up on your school intranet. They can be an email sent out. They could be a memo sent around. They could be a video that the person makes about the announcement if they want. But it doesn't require everyone to be in the same place at the same time, sitting around waiting for everyone else's questions to be heard and answered, and for the person who came in late, who didn't hear it all, to be told a second time about everything. That's a waste of people's time. And we really need to, as teachers, focus in on those 80% tasks. And there's a whole chapter in the book that's about how schools and school leaders can really start to shift this to really help teachers to focus on the things they're trained in and the things that they want to do, the things they're passionate about.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I love how in your book, after every chapter, you have questions to have the reader actually work through what they've learned in the chapter and develop these things for themselves. So, you're not just passively absorbing this information. You're actually creating a plan for yourself. You're actually changing the way you do things. You're creating systems for yourself. You're thinking about these templates. You're actually defining what are your goals, what is important to you, what are your values. And so you can create that matrix and start using it. So your book is great. I think all teachers should read it. It's an easy read. You can get through it and get to the useful strategies really easily and work through those so that you can start enjoying your job more, reduce stress, reduce overwhelm, and find a lot more time to do the things that really matter to you. So where can our listeners find your book? Where can they learn more about you?
So the book is up on Amazon, so they can buy the book on Amazon. That's the easiest place to get any book, really. It's always always there. And if you want to connect with me, you can come to the website, teacherspd.net, or my handle is @DanJacksonTPD, both on Instagram and Twitter. Come and follow me there. I'd love to connect with you in that way as well.
Awesome. And we'll put all the links to these things in our show notes at educom.com/TBE 149, episode 149. All right, Dan, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your time and the work that you're doing in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Kaylee.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Go check out Dan's book, Work Less, Teach More. Now, he also has a podcast, the Effective Teaching Podcast, and he interviewed me for his podcast on episode number 99. So if you want to hear me being interviewed on his podcast, go check it out, the Effective Teaching Podcast. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with someone that you think would get value from it too. And if you are feeling generous, we would love it if you would leave a review on our podcast. So whether you do that in Apple, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, that's what it's called. Or if you do it in Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, that would really help other teachers that are looking for this kind of podcast to be able to find the Balanced Educator Podcast. All right. Have a fantastic week. Bye.